Hi, I'm Darren Cox from Garblino. I've been really privileged in my angling career to fish for probably the best team in the world, England Team Feeder. I've learnt so much along the way about feeder fishing, and it's one of those methods where you can make it as complicated as you want. In reality, you can catch a heck of a lot of fish on the feeder with just doing things very simply and keeping it simple, using the right gear at the right place. You can just do so much with it. We're here today at Monkhall Fishery. I'm going to carry on fishing because I've been catching loads of fish and enjoying it. I'm here at Monkhall Fishery today. It's arguably one of the most beautiful commercial fisheries in the country. Right up on the side of the hill, close to Bridge North, really nice place, full of fish as well. So what I thought we'd do is just talk today about feeder fishing setups. Conventional feeder fishing is a lot different to fishing at commercials. Where you can fish with a feeder on commercials, namely where the water's a little bit larger or you've got islands to fish to, it's a great method. But you have to keep it fairly simple. Make it complicated and you'll make it very, very hard work. So in terms of the gear you need, it's quite straightforward. Most of these type of fisheries, it's only a relatively short cast. So you don't want to be using a long rod. You just want something like I'm using today, like 10-foot essential method feeder rod. It's got a little bit of backbone in the bottom, but it's a nice soft tip so that you can catch fish of all sizes. And it's really important not to overgun yourself on places like this. You don't need to cast a long distance, so you don't need a long rod. If you don't need a long rod, then you can fish with a fairly nice sensitive rod. It's actually much nicer fishing, and when you're catching fish of all sizes, there's one there, look. When you catch fish of all sizes, you need that forgivingness in the rod. That means you'll undoubtedly get more fish out. Just take your time with the bigger fish, but when you've got these smaller fish, you can just bring them in steady away, and you won't generally lose them off. You lose a few, but it's all part of the fun. If you're not in a match, then you can just, if you're out places fishing, you can just practice the way you play fish. That's one of the most important things, is try and understand what your gear can do for you. I'm fishing with an 8-pound mainline. You know, you'd say that's quite heavy for a place like this. But one of the things is I'm casting to an island, and it's really important that you cast fairly close to the island. Most of these islands have ledges on, and where the ledges are, the fish like to feed on the ledges. So I try and get as close as I can to the ledge. I've got reeds over there, and I've got wooden boards like stakes that are holding the bank together. That signals a really good place to fish on places like this. I mean, look at that, beautiful fish, isn't it? 2.5, £2.10, really nice commons. There's commons and mirrors and lots of F1s in here as well. So it's a great mixture of fish. All I'm doing, I'm just fishing a little tiny, it's one of our Garblino pellet feeders, a little tiny cut down feeder. I've chopped it back a little bit because don't ever put too much feed around your feeder. Give them little and often. Make sure you're casting all the time. These fish, you ring the dinner bell and these fish will come for the dinner. They know that noise often makes feed. Now they're not stupid, they're not just going to give themselves up straight away, so you've got to have some good form of presentation. I'm just putting a little tiny 6mm wafter on a band there. So basically I've got a 16 hook with a hair rig and a band in the hair rig. 4-inch hook length is as good as anything, but you can go shorter if you want. You can go a little bit longer. It's inline at Monkhall. Inline means that the feeder mustn't actually be fixed. So if I hook a fish and the line breaks here somewhere, then it means that fish can lose a feeder very, very quickly, and it'll lose a hook as a matter of course. So it's a safe rig and a safe feeder rig, and a lot of places advocate that you need safe rigs. Some of the Guru X-Safe systems are allowed as well. That's a very, very good and safe rig. But the little pellet feeder It's good for a number of reasons. It helps you deliver the right amount of bait every cast. Look at that straight away. Oh, I missed that one. They were chucking the feeder there straight away. But it helps you, you know, you can see I'm casting regularly, and it helps you deliver the correct amount of bait, just enough bait to catch fish. If you start putting too much bait in, you get ridiculous amounts of fish in your peg, you start to get lots of liners, you start to miss bites, you start to foul hook fish. So I try and keep it fairly simple. You know, a small feeder. I've got fishery micros. I've got a few 6mm pellets mixed in, just a few, so that in the feed there might be 5 or 6 of them. And this pink wafter is very, very good. I'm catching lots of fish on it today. But sometimes when you get lots of fish in the peg, you can get signs and you don't always catch fish. And that, to me, is telling you that you need to think about changing your hook bait. And one of the best things to do is just to go to a 4mm or a 6mm instead of a very, very bright. Oh, signs there. If they don't like bright, then blend your hook bait in. Yeah? I've just got dampened down micros and 6mm in the feeder, as I say. They're only slightly dampened because what I want them to do, when I squeeze them in like that, I put the hook bait slightly in there, only slightly, because I want that to pop out. And the beauty about the pellet feeder is the bait only comes out at the end, and your hook bait only comes out at the end. So when that bait is falling down there, your hook bait is in a perfect position to actually be ready for the fish to suck the whole of your feeding and your hook bait. So it creates the perfect trap. Now there's lots and lots of fish here today, and it's great fun. You know, I'm casting out, I'm lowering the feeder in slightly, but the feeder is making quite a nice noise. I've got about 26 grams of lead on there, so for the distance of the cast, that's quite a lot. So I'm getting lots and lots of liners now, so I'm going to have to settle down. I'll be talking to you and I've got carried away. So I need to settle down, cast it out and wait for them to pull the rod in, which is what they do. There's no such thing as like a tentative bite when you're fishing this kind of method. If the tip is like knocking like that, generally that means that around the feeder and the knocking the line or the knocking the feeder or hitting the bait. When you get a proper bite, the fish will take your hook bait in, it'll suck it in, potentially try and blow it out. As it tries to blow it out, it'll hook it and it'll shake its head, and either the tip of your rod will come backwards and your line will go slack, or it'll go around like that and you'll have a fish on. It's very, very simple. One of the main things is casting. You've got to be fairly accurate when you're fishing with a feeder. Like I said earlier, you've got to fish fairly close to these islands unless you've got open water, but it does pay to be as accurate as you can even in open water. But when you've got an island, you've got a signpost to cast to, and it's really, really important. Just a day's practicing, just come fishing, and so I'm getting signs all the time there now. They've gone a bit silly on me. A day's practicing, just a day like this, just casting regularly and catching plenty of fish, and before you realise it, you'll be casting so accurately. You can see the pink wafter there is just showing out the end of the feeder. Not squeeze it too hard, I want it to come out very quickly because the fish are straight on the feeder. Nice tight cast, just to the side of the reeds, but in what I found is like a plateau. There's just a slightly shallow area, maybe where there used to be reeds and they've been pulled out, but it's nice and flat. There's lots of fish there. You can see already my tips going round and pinging and pulling round. I just have to be patient. There you go, and that one was on. That's what I should have been doing. I was too busy talking to the camera, and it just about concentrating, catching a fish, casting out, loading the feeder correctly every time. Think about how much water you put in your pellets. Overweight your pellets, they go stodgy and they won't spring out of that pellet feeder. And that's really, really important when you're catching lots of fish, that they spring out. You get them to spring out, the fish can get to your hook bait very, very quickly, and you can start to catch a lot of fish. So these are lovely sized fish, just mainly commons, but a few mirrors and some F1s as well. But a day's fishing, you know, just a day's pleasure fishing, it's just incredible to have a day like this. It's just lovely. In match conditions, a little bit more difficult, but you just got to do things a little bit more carefully. You know, you've got to be a little bit more accurate when you're casting. Got to be careful how much bait you feed. And there you see, it's a nice little common by the looks of that. Be careful when you're casting. Try and find your own space in a match as well. You know, everybody wants to cast to these islands, but everybody's got an allotted area on places like this. And look, there you go, another nice little common, lovely fish that, beautiful. Again, £2.10 probably. A lot of them are almost identical size, close to £3, but not quite. See, again, I've got my wafter there, I can use that again. Size 16 hook. I've not got a light line on, I've got a diameter 18 Super G power line, which is a nice tough line. I don't think it's about the diameter of line with small fish like this. They're just muscling in on the feed, and when they're muscling around the feed, the water's very coloured. You can see over there there's clouds of clay coming up from where there's another one, look. You can probably see there's a very slight skim on the water at the moment, and one of the things which is important is to get your rod very, very low to the water. The lower your rod is to the water, the less the wind actually impedes on the bow in the line. So I put my rod down like that, and I'm just using a feeder arm. It's one of the Galbalino ones, absolutely brilliant. They're really sturdy, it goes straight onto my leg, fixed in position, you can put any rod rest on it, but most importantly, it sits perfectly well. There you go, just proved how good it is. It just sits nicely, and when you get the rod low to the water, that skim doesn't form a big bow in your line, especially when you're getting lots of bite, because it doesn't get time to form a big bow, and when it's close to the water's edge, it sits nicely. I often just use that little tiny bit of a bow just to put a bend in the rod, and you can see that there's absolutely no resistance. There's resistance to the fish when it actually picks the feeder up, but the least amount of resistance there is on the line for fish touching the line, the less chance you have of actually spooking them, which is quite important, because you often see that a fish goes over your line, touches it, and you can see it bow wave away, oh, look at that, that's ridiculous. Didn't even have a chance to put that on the rest. Crazy. Yeah, you can see clouds of clay coming up from where the fish are, so they're not shy in terms of line diameter. But I often think, you know, especially where F1s are concerned, it's usually quite good to fish a slightly smaller hook. You know, they're not big fish, so you have to give them that little bit of respect. If you give them that respect, then you'll catch more of them. If your peg turns into a peg where you can catch, you know, some of these big fish, you can put a bigger bait on, you can put a bigger hook on, but always match the size of your hook to the bait you're using. That's the best example there. Look, oh, too many fish in my peg now. The rod is a nice setup, because it's a nice action, forgiving rod. I can see the bites, it's a delicate enough tip. The reel is just basically a 40 size reel, not a big reel, but it's big enough to do anything. And you can use it in open water, use it for bomb fishing. but you just want a reel with a good drag on it, so you can fish with the anti-reverse on, but a good drag will mean that you don't lose as many fish when they kite off or they pull hard. Just chucking it into that little hole there, and you can probably see with the tip, as soon as put the in there, look, straight away you get it in the right spot, be accurate, and you just catch fish all day. It's lovely fishing. But there's fisheries all around the country with this kind of fishing, and if you've not had a go at fishing a feeder on commercials especially, then it really is worth it, because it's good fun. And a lot of people neglect this method because the venues are potentially quite narrow and you can fish a lot of your swim with the pole, but on days when it's windy, the feeder really does make a difference a lot of time. Look, we've got an F1 there, nice fish. And I think that's probably what the silly bites were. I've probably got a shoal of F1s in my peg, and they hit your feeder so hard, you've just got to be so careful. Because sometimes they hit the feeder so hard, they dislodge it, and you think that because your feeder's dislodged, you get the drop back and it's the fish is on. But they're not, they're just banging the feeder all the time. They might not be very big, but boy, they are aggressive fish at times when you get them feeding around the feeder. So you notice I'm constantly casting all the time, and I think that's very important. If you actually, oh, there you go, if you wait for the fish to come to you, you will catch a few fish, but there has to be pellets around your feeder and around your hook bait, and constantly bait coming in. Keep ringing that dinner bell, keep making that, not a big noise, but making a noise for the feeder dropping in, even in shallow water, and you'll find that the fish do come to you. If you sit and wait for them, you will catch a few, but you will not catch as many as the anglers that are constantly putting the bait in. Lost that one. Constantly putting the bait in, constantly propping the feeder in and catching all the time. If you're feeding the fish, generally the fish will feed and you will catch them. Rod choice is quite important for places like this. You know, they're only small venues, so you don't need a big rod, and you're much better off having a rod that's got some action in it and can play fish rather than a poker. And you'll find on these smaller casts that a shorter rod, it makes you much more accurate. You can drop the feeder in a tiny little hole against the island, so it's just getting used to it. And with a short rod, I mean, this is the essential 10 foot. It's got a slight parabolic action, but it's got a nice light tip. And one of the reasons it's got a nice light tip is it's got a ½ ounce tip in it, and they come with 3/4 ounce tips and ounce tips. But it just means that when you've got a lighter tip in it, you can just turn slightly and get a very slight bend in the tip without moving the feeder. And it's really important not to move the feeder off the ledge, because that's where the fish are. The reel itself is one of our gold reels. It's a beautiful reel. It's got a match spool on it. I still fill it with 8-pound line. I think it's really important to have quite a decent sized line, even on small venues, because there's very little stretch in an 8-pound line. It means you can get very accurate to the far bank and tight. I also actually spool the reel, and you can see on that reel there, the line is absolutely flush with the top, so it means that I've got nowhere that's impeding my cast. So as long as I'm in control, as long as I am accurate, I can get a really good cast with this all the time. It's also very important to have a decent drag. You need to have a drag, otherwise a good drag, disc brake drag, so that you will, when you get fish, if you get a slightly bigger fish, you can use your drag and it'll pull that off rather than break off or bump it off. And it just means that you can have the anti-reverse on, makes it cleaner fishing, and then you just get that every now and again. When it kicks in, there's another fish, look. So this settled down now, it's just nice fishing. And it's about getting into a routine. I'm not firing any bait out of the catapult. If I was fishing a match, I'd probably set the pole up, so I'd be concentrating and throwing bait in somewhere else. But just with a feeder, it's just very, very simple. If you come, like I say, for a day's pleasure fishing, it's just great fun. It's nice and comfortable. You can sit with the rod on your lap, or you can put it in 2 rests and just have a nice day's fishing. It's just very, very enjoyable. And when you get these fish feeding like this, it's wonderful fishing.